Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome. I'm Jane Dutton, and I'm just thrilled to be here. There are some familiar faces in the room and some unfamiliar new faces. And some of you have traveled a really long ways to get here. So I appreciate your presence, and I appreciate you coming to learn about compassion at work. I didn't know, yay! I didn't know if there was going to be anyone here to introduce me, but since there isn't, I'm going to just spend a little bit of a time telling you a little bit, for those who don't know me, kind of why I'm here. I was lucky enough, actually, to be a faculty member in the Positive Work Pod in Accomal when positive psychology was just sort of starting. I was there with one of my students, Amy Rezniewski, who, if any of you who study callings, she's kind of the callings person. And I could never have imagined kind of how positive psychology has taken off. My little part of the positive psychology piece is I'm an organizational scholar. So I'm a person in this interdisciplinary space on organization. So I am fascinated by organizations. And I live in a business school, although I study, and people in my center, the Center for Positive Organizational Scholarship, pay a lot of attention to all kinds of organizations, school organizations, medical organizations, libraries. It doesn't matter. All organizations are interesting. And I've been part of this center for, it's now going to be called the Center for Positive Organizations, but it's the Center for Positive Organization Scholarship at Michigan since 2001. And this work on compassion, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got into it, is just a piece of the part I am passionate about. I care a lot about positive relationships at work, and compassion is really just a natural extension of that. This is my first time speaking to a positive psych group about this. I'm really hoping I can infect you with the possibilities and just remind us at some level of the beauty of compassion and all the possibilities about compassion is also how our institutions sometimes snuff out or make it quite difficult for that sort of natural healing force to be released. So I am standing also here on behalf of the Compassion Lab, which was, when we formed it, it was in 2001. It was an intentional sort of use of a term that just seemed funny, that you would use lab and compassion kind of in the same. So we were trying to be really scientific, hard-nosed in the face of something that's so much about the human heart. But it's actually been, for me, probably the most meaningful research group I've ever been a part of. We've really intentionally, we have a wonderful website. If you go onto compassionlab.com, you can download all the stuff that we have. It's at the end. Our website and stuff is at the end of the handout that you have. But we've also are trying to share where all the other resources that we have found sort of connected around compassion. So it's a good, hopefully it'll be a good resource for you. But I'm here representing them, so it's not just me. Okay, I actually want to start with two stories. One is a personal story. Well, they're actually both personal stories, but they're both meant to give you a sense of, in a very grounded way, where my passion about this comes from. This is me. I have a joint appointment. I have tenure in psych and a tenure in the business school. And in the early 1990s, we had a trauma happen in our family with one of our children. She's fine. She's 26. She's doing great. So no worry. But it was one of those things that just was horrible, that I hope all of us have different versions of this in our lives. And what was so stunning was the difference in the way the two departments that I was jointly appointed in responded to it. And again, there are very good people in the psych department and in the business school. This is not an issue of good people. This is really an issue of whether the good compassion of those good people could be mobilized in service of something very special, a special kind of pain that had happened to people. And in this case, business school won hands down. I mean, I happen to live in an organization that is actually very competent at compassion organizing. We've actually written about that. It's been a real puzzle for us to understand what it is about some institutions and some organizations that makes them very effective at sort of using this human unleashing and then organizing this human compassion capability. So I think if I think about where my personal interest came from, it came from a very grounded sense that as an employee, it made a difference. I was in two worlds, and one world I found more healing. The other was not healing. It just wasn't as healing as you would have expected, given the good people that were in it. Okay, the second story tells you again something why I'm so amazingly passionate about this. And that is, I was supposed to give my first talk on compassion on September 11th, 2001 at the business school. Now, I had moved to Michigan from New York University. I commuted through the World Trade Center every day on my way to work for 6 years. So the World Trade Center had a lot of sort of personal meaning to me. Of course, I didn't give my talk. I didn't sleep the night before because I was actually very nervous about being a female professor in an organization behavior. That's kind of the soft side of business schools. And I could just imagine my finance faculty members going, this just doesn't belong in a business school. Well, of course, I didn't give my talk because of what happened. But what did happen is we had a new dean. He actually asked me to write a memo. The only reason he knew I was doing compassion stuff was because I was supposed to do it that day. He had just started. He was a week in. He asked me to create a memo based on my research about what he should do with his leadership team. Now, for all of you who are applied in the room, that's no big deal because that's how you think. But I was much more in the, I do research, I don't do application. But it was an amazing call. It was a real call to say, okay, what do you know that's useful, that could be put into place right now? And so I did that with much trepidation, along with the wonderful help of the Compassion Lab. He found it very useful, ended up sending it out to all the Michigan alumni. We have 40,000 students at Michigan. We got amazing feedback about how useful this little memo was. And so, again, in November of 2001, we were supposed to have our first Positive Organizational Scholarship conference. So we had people like Chris Peterson and Barb Fredrickson, all these people coming. And I thought, gosh, if you think what I have to say is useful to leaders at this time, you should see these people that are coming to this conference. So I invited everybody to write a memo. It would be a gift to leaders about what their research suggests that they could offer at this point in time. And we created a website. Now, 2001, websites didn't come up like that. This was a lot of work. And we got all this feedback. In fact, again, if you Google Leading in Trying Times, you will find the website. The gifts, the essays are still up there. But we got an amazing gift from the universe, if you want to say, like amazing feedback very quickly, much more quickly than typically academics get feedback about the usefulness of this perspective, not just the compassion perspective, but positive psychology and others, to how it could really inform leadership practice and sort of how you think about organizations. So that was, a lot of years ago, now 13 years ago, and I still feel as fired up, and I'm only one of many that are in my little part of the world, fired up about the incredible difference that this can make at the organizational level. I mean, that's what I'm going to try to tell you is this is beyond positive psychology. This is, all right, how can you think about, I guess in Marty's terms, it would be positive institutions. How can you think about sort of putting organizations, creating structures, practices, processes in organizations that unleash this incredible capability and capacity for not just flourishing, for not just having a good life, but actually doing really good work that really is high quality and really matters. So those are my two stories to tell you that I've been doing this compassion work for a long time, but it's grounded both in a personal but also an institutional story that just keeps me. I'm 61. I was thinking about retiring at 60. Forget it. I mean, there's just so much great work to do in this domain, so I also see this as an invitation. Okay, the other thing I want to tell you, I told you I'm going to get up to my goals, but I mean, this is exciting times. If you are interested at all in compassion in the world, it's exciting times. I mean, these are just some of the manifestations of that excitement. In 2008, Karen Armstrong gave a TED Talk, and when she called for a charter for compassion. I didn't check this morning about the number of people, but globally, You have people and institutions signing up for this charter. And what's so exciting, and next to it, has been the social organizing that's happened around her talk. So you have the Compassion Action Network now certifying cities. In fact, the Dalai Lama this morning sort of endorsed, there's a commitment that by 2015 globally we're supposed to have 100 compassionate cities. But they're certifying universities, they're certifying hospitals. I mean, it's very interesting that they are sort of trying to mobilize and increase the compassion capacity of large institutions through this certification process. Now, I have no idea whether it will work, but boy, is there a churn. I mean, there really is a fascinating churn. I just came from Louisville. They had the first 2013 International Summit Conference on Compassionate Organizations, and it was really fascinating to see, again, the diverse set of institutions and professions that were involved. For example, there were a lot of people from the legal field who are interested in sort of reframing what legal institutions are doing through a more compassionate lens. There were the people from healthcare. I mean, there were a lot of the expected sort of players in the compassion domain, but it was really impressive to see the number of public officials and people in very different institutions that you wouldn't think about compassion with, that are really trying to unlock the capacity for compassion. Stanford has done a fantastic job. You have a couple of big name kind of institutions in the U.S. So this is just the U.S. I realize that's, Stanford's done a fantastic job. If you're interested in compassion and you're not on their Facebook page or on their email list, you should be, because they're sending out great stuff every day. And the Science of Virtues Network at the University of Chicago. I mean, you see Notre Dame. I mean, you see a lot of institutions that are sort of naming themselves as having this sort of specialization. And the one at the bottom this is my major sort of professional association, is the Academy of Management, which has 20,000 management business school professor type people and practitioners. It's a global organization, and it had as its conference theme in 2010, Dare to Care, which is just, again, in business, in sort of the heart of business organizations or business scholarship, sort of made compassion be a thing. So it's exciting times. And again, I'm trying to infect you as practitioners or researchers. When I started doing this, I'm really glad I was tenured, because it was really out there. It is so not out there now. It's really moving kind of much more center stage globally, which is very exciting. So here's what I want to do. I want to give you some starting definitions and assumptions and talk about what we've uncovered, meaning a lot of different people, not just the Compassion Lab, about how compassionate work matters, both for organizations and for individuals. Then we're going to talk, to me, the heart of what I want to share with you is the conditions that foster compassionate work, because I want to get you to take a little bit of your psychology hat off and sort of think maybe even for a minute like a sociologist and say, okay, how can we bring sort of our understanding of how social conditions enable the good psychology of individuals. And in this particular case, it's about compassion. Then, importantly, we're going to talk about compassion blockages and then some practical implications. So I have it structured, so there's 3 little participative parts, and I'm really hoping you're going to go with me on that. I'm used to moving around and sort of I have a really hard time sort of standing up in front, but I need your input, and that's why I was so blessed to have 2 people helping me collect some of the wisdom in the room about what do you care about? What do you need to know about compassionate work? Because I feel like, again, for me, this is sort of a coming out talk, but I need feedback. I want to grow this. I know some of you are already doing this in your work. This is a field that needs to grow. People are hungry for it. So I want to have you appreciate the power of this. I mean, this stuff really matters. I'm sure you know it from your own work experience. But again, as a former strategy professor, I can tell you it matters a lot for sustainable strategic success in most organizations, not just in healthcare. In most organizations, it is, in some sense, I know you probably won't like this, but in business schools we talk this way, the strategic weapon. It's like a secret sauce. Maybe that's sort of a better way if you like cooking. I mean, it's really part of the magic of the human possibility enacted in everyday healing that you can unleash in an organization. And I want to inspire. I want to inspire to think about the choices of workplaces that foster compassion. I mean, how many of you teach in this room? How many of you? Okay. So if you're teaching, you're having tons of contact with people of probably all ages. And at least where I live, those people are looking for jobs. But they don't have a way of even thinking about how do you discern from the outside, particularly, whether an organization has high compassion capability. Because as a human being, you're going to grow better with the inevitable ups and downs in life if you're in an organization that is good at this. But how do we discern that, especially from the outside? And also again, the pragmatist in me, I want to help you think about how can we design organizations that foster compassion. It doesn't have to be whole organizations. It could be units. If any of you are managing a unit, if any of you are doing a startup, if you have a consulting business or a coaching business, how can you think about actually designing the base conditions where it's more likely that compassion will unfold? So that's another sort of hope I have. So now I'm in the definitions. There's so many ways I could go here. This is just going to be the start. But I love Jack Kornfield's, his definition. There's, again, more scientific definitions, but it's the heart's response to human suffering. And what I love in Dr. Keltner's book, Born to Be Good, I mean, he is one of the many people who are writing now with all the advances in neuroscience and, about the fact that we are born to do this. We are born to do this. There's actually a wonderful edited book. I think I have it cited here by Brown and Penner called Beyond Self-Interest. Is that right, Barb? Beyond Self-Interest that was published this year that pulls together, again, a lot of the different sort of new science about how we are born to be compassionate or to be caring, which is a really, it's an amazingly different view, obviously, than the self-interested view. And I don't think of it as either or, I think of it as both. And again, part of what we can think about with organizations is how do you turn on, the other interested or the more compassionate, the more caring, the more cooperative side of human beings, because you're likely, therefore, to make your organization more compassionate. Now, the way we have talked, this third bullet, the way we have talked about compassion is actually borrowing from sociology rather than psychology. Psychology mostly defines compassion as an emotion. It's a feeling. But again, I live in a pragmatic world where it's partly about getting things done. And there's often a lot of blockages between compassion and compassionate action, compassionate feeling and compassionate action. And actually, a lot of the action on compassion is actually not even about feeling. It's about noticing human suffering. That in some organizations, they make it easy for you to notice suffering. In some organizations, they make it quite difficult. So we think about compassion more as a process that moves from noticing to feeling to responding or acting. And not necessarily in that linear order. That's just in some sense a convenience, a way to think about it that's really useful. Again, if we're thinking about organizations, work, what is it that facilitates or retards noticing pain? What is it that facilitates or retards feeling empathetic concern or feeling compassion? What is it that enables or retards responding? Responding particularly in a meaningful way. I mean, another sort of difference, I think, in what we think about a lot is that compassion is a skilled relational practice, particularly the responding side of compassion is skilled. I mean, you probably all had this experience where you've had some pain happen to you, and some people, the way they interact with you, you experience as healing. For other people, it may not be healing. Well, that's sort of, again, a piece of evidence that there's competence and capability or in compassion as skilled practice, particularly, again, the responding side of compassion that I think it's important for us to consider. So in our work, we've talked about two kinds of compassion. Interpersonal compassion, which is the piece that is what I'm going to focus on now. That's more the dyadic compassion. So we're going to talk a lot about all the conditions that either, again, open or close our capacity to, from an interpersonal perspective, to be compassionate. But this second part is something, again, I think it's really important for us to think about, and that is that organizations meaningfully differ in their capability to do this kind of interpersonal work. The picture here I love, because this is two women who are in a unit we affectionately call Midwest Billing, but they're okay if we tell you who it is. It's Jackson Community Hospital Billing Department in Jackson, Michigan. A very poor part of Michigan. The kinds of people they serve are mostly low income. Most of the people that work in the billing department are low income. But there's a 30-person waiting list for people who want to work in the billing department. It is number one or number two in the state in terms of their capacity to collect a dollar. I mean, they are really good at doing. And the amazing thing is, and this is what drew us to them originally, was the people that work there would say that in working there they learned to love. And these were people who had domestic violence at home, and these were people who, in their home environments, were actually getting quite depleted. And they felt like coming to work, they were not only getting replenished from a sort of a resource renewal perspective, but they were actually learning to be better mothers, better fathers. So I'm gonna assert, and if you get interested in this, you can download some of our stuff off the Compassion Lab, but there are meaningful differences. There's a lot more research to do, but there are meaningful differences in organizations' compassion capability. And again, I'll hope I can just raise this for all of you in positive psychology. What I'd like that to be an example for you is for you to think about all those virtues and strengths we talk about at the individual level. Well, what would it mean if we applied them more to a collective level? So what would it mean to really try to understand what does it make an organization wise, or an organization of high integrity? Actually, we studied that a little bit already, but of compassion, of courageous organization. So we're going down the compassion highway, but there's, again, a huge opportunity here to talk about sort of from a strategic perspective, like how do you organize or design for these kinds of collective human strengths? And I think it's a really important area where positive psychology and positive organizational psychology has a lot to add. Okay, another key assumption that you need to hold on to is there's always pain in the room. So, I mean, just look around. Don't have to have eye contact with anybody. Just look around. I mean, there is pain in this room. It's pain in lots of different forms. We are really good at hiding it, particularly in workplaces, and I'm not saying that we should all be displaying it. I'm just trying to remind us that just through human existence, that is always true. And this is Peter Frost, my wonderful colleague who was in the Compassion Lab and passed away midway in our Compassion Lab. So that was his phrase. And I know when I go in and teach a class, and when I'm nervous about this, part of the way I bring myself to connect is think this. There's always pain in the room. And it makes me approach the situation with a more open-hearted stance to sort of remember that my heart will already start to help if I can just remember this. So in organizations, there's so many types of suffering. I mean, these are just some of the things that you know. I think what's important about this list, and comes from our work, is that organizations inflict a lot of pain on people. And so it isn't just pain that people bring in from their lives into the workplace, but organizations inflict a lot of this. I read, there's a great, Chris Porath and Chris Pearson are probably the two top people studying incivility and civility at the workplace. They have a new book coming out in which they've done these extensive surveys, and I think it's something like, I may be wrong by 10%, so give me a little leeway there. But something like 89% of people report, this is again in the United States, different kinds of workplace, experiencing incivility on a regular basis. I mean, there is when I do this in my class, I teach night MBAs who are working. Again, I live in Michigan. If you haven't been in Michigan in the United States, it's a lot of auto companies, a lot of depressed people. in Michigan, a lot of depressed industries kind of in Michigan. And so the level of pain that doesn't always bring out the best in people, so the level of disrespect is even higher. So anyway, the point is that there's so much good compassion can do because of the presence of pain. Okay, so what I'd like us to start with is bring some of this experience into the class. I'm thinking of you as a class, but into the room. And we won't spend a lot of time, but I think it's really important for you to think about it. If you just turn to the person next door to you, or trios are fine, and share a story, a time when you or someone you knew experienced compassion at work. And you might think about what prompted the compassion. So why did it happen? How was it expressed? And what were its impacts? And sort of notice the commonality. Let's see, I did put my watch back on. Okay, so we'll just take about 7 minutes for you to do that, and then we'll move on. But I think it's important. We'll debrief a little bit after you've done this. Okay. Sorry. Sorry to have to break you up. I mean, some of you know I study high quality connections, and I'm always breaking people up even though I study connection. I'm sorry to do that to you. But let me just process a couple of things. So is anyone willing to share what's a way that compassion showed up? So how did compassion show up in people's stories? Let's just get a couple of examples. How did they show up? How did you know? What did people do or say?
Rushed across the room and hugged me.
Pardon?
Rushed across the room and hugged me.
Okay, so rushed across. I mean, again, notice speed. There's a sort of a dimension of immediacy or sort of speed. Rushed across and hugged. Again, oftentimes compassion has a lot of sort of physicality kind of around it. What else? Yeah, Catherine.
Taking the time to figure out what's the right time of doing. Being aware that you don't know what to say or what to do, but then not just not doing it, but
Yeah.
actually studying and
Yes.
and asking and saying, how do I say
Yes. Yes, I love that. I mean, again, if you could sort of think about in our simple model inquiry, inquiry into kind of what is a person's situation, what is my situation. I mean, in order to be able to do, like you're saying, to do it well, you can't assume that you know necessarily. I mean, I think actually these are a beautiful contrast because you can have the automatic response, which sometimes is just what people need, and then you have the more studied kind of reaction that Catherine suggests. Yeah.
both of our examples clearly a willingness to listen.
Yeah, such an important point. Like being present and listening is probably some of the most powerful ways we can be compassionate.
And a willingness to connect. There was a company that won the Psychologically Healthy Workplace Award in Illinois, where the CEO, for the first hour and a half of every day, went around and talked to everyone in the organization.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love that there's concrete examples of this. I mean, leaders who till the soil well in the sense of building these connections. Naturally, again, if you can think about compassion as just sort of a natural extension of very well-tilled soil that's fertile for the human connection. Beautiful example. Was there another hand? Yeah.
First of all, it was not easy to find one.
This is,
Like, it's really difficult.
well, that's telling.
It tells a lot. But I think what we came up with a conclusion was that they have to be intentional. I mean, and you see people who try, but some people are totally blind
Yeah.
on their own behavior.
Yeah.
But I think to be able to be compassionate, share compassion at work in the organization, you have to have that intention.
Yes.
You have to have that leader going. I mean, you have to decide that I will act like this. I will find the ways to use.
I think this is such a good point. I mean, that, again, if we're thinking about it from the perspective of what we call in our work focal actor, potential compassion giver, we're purposely actually not using the language of giver and receiver because we don't want it to think about it as a social exchange. But if you think that intentions are really important. But if you actually look at organizations that are capable at this, it doesn't matter. Actually, people will say they experience all the time people being compassionate. Then you go back and you talk to the person. They said, I didn't even know I was being that way. But again, in these fertile workplaces, it's everywhere, and intention becomes less of an issue. So I think that's really important. Okay, last comment, and then we'll.
I think it's when people do a little bit more, like going the extra mile. Sometimes against policies or sometimes
Yeah.
it's like a little costly. People still able to give their time and
Yeah.
reflect on it and give a little more.
Yeah, this is, I know you can't hear it necessarily in the back, but the point here was it's more, compassion is when you go sort of above and beyond, you give more, particularly if the circumstances are actually working against you being compassionate. In some sense, it's more meaningful. Again, we just finished this annual review on compassion, and we have sort of meaning making sort of happening between each of or what psychologists would call appraisal, kind of happening sort of in between, all of these different stages. So all along, we're making sense of kind of what does that person's efforts mean. I mean, did they intend to it? Didn't they not? Did they go that extra mile? Yeah, these are all really good points. See how infinitely interesting? I mean, we could just stay with this for the rest of the hour, but we're not going to. So there's lots of forms of compassion action. You've already suggested one. I want to make a couple of points here. One is that is about the importance in work organizations of flexibility and time. That sometimes some of the best gifts that people can get, resources, is literally flexibility, the option to do what they need to do kind of in the face of it. And in organizations, there's a lot of tensions about, do we have rules, routines, that give people, kind of have rules of the game? What do we do when someone dies, that kind of thing? Or, do we have more flexibility? If you have more flexibility, it requires, again, back to good soil. You have to have pretty good trust in an organization that the routines or the rules won't be misused sort of in any way. But flexibility and time are some of the most important resources when we're talking about work organizations. And then the other point I wanted to make is about, this again is why studying this requires more than just psychology, is that really in workplaces, compassion is rarely done alone. Like your sort of example of sitting and listening on a dyadic thing is actually rare. Like when we've asked people to tell stories about compassion, it's usually been like what I think about as a beautiful improvised dance, among partners in dancing who kind of come in and out of the dance. And in organizations which are really good at this, you see that. So different people step up at different times as kind of the episode unfolds over time. So again, when we're thinking about organizations, we need to think about what is the level and quality of coordination of the different kind of resources to a particular person as that person's situation changes over time. So the coordination piece is really important. Here are different dimensions that our research has suggested is important when we're thinking about dimensions of compassionate actions. And I'm purposely using the term actions to denote the behaviors that people elicit, because Adler and Parker, this is their distinction. I think it's really helpful. If we think about from a suffering event to the whole sort of set of actions that happen, that is all compassionate responding. So the whole thing is responding. Like noticing, feeling is human responding to suffering. But the thing we're going to call actions is the actual behaviors. Anyway, there's a lot of different dimensions upon which we can think about this. And this last one is there's ordinary compassion, and then there's extraordinary compassion. And in my center, we actually spend a lot of time selecting on the dependent variable, which is a no-no if you're doing. But in part, what that means is selecting to look for real cases of positive deviance. Because if we're doing traditional methods of not looking at what's really extraordinary, sometimes the extraordinariness, you can't understand the patterning of the extraordinariness. And I want to single out Cisco as an amazing organization in terms of compassion. I'm not so sure right now, but when we started studying them 10 years ago, they were amazing. John Chambers is amazing. Just to convince you of that, I'm going to give you a portrait of one compassion episode. This was a guy we called in Israel. All we'd heard, it was from somebody at Cisco had said, this guy had a bad bike accident. And this is sort of typical of what Cisco does. Are you ready? All right, this is Ari. I've disguised his name. Ari W., he's a sales district manager. He's worked for Cisco. Look at this, for 1 year, 3 months. That's it. On February 7th, so he's not a long-term employee. He's not a high-power guy. He's a salesperson. He's riding his bike in a city park and had a terrible fall. What happened next? Well, I'm going to tell you the things that have happened, one at the global level and the other at the local level. At the global level, the country manager notified his country's HR manager and the HR manager in Europe. The president of EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, directs the country management to do whatever it takes to support Ari and his family. Cisco's management in Europe keeps checking with management in the home country. The president of EMEA and the VP of operations call Ari in the hospital before the second surgery to provide quote-unquote mental support. They wrote to Ari to make sure that he knew that his job was secure, so he had that in writing. The president of EMEA and the vice president of operations stayed in touch with management of Ari's home country to make financial arrangements. The employees in the home country donated vacation days, which were converted to money, and then matched by country management and matched again by corporate headquarters in the US, which was approved by John Chambers. When Ari was released from the hospital, wait, there's the approval. Whoops, this is very fancy here. When Ari was released from the hospital and returned to work, he received several emails from the president at LMIA and John Chambers from the US. Okay, at the local level, so that's corporate. At the local level, manager came to the hospital right away, and they brought food to all the people waiting there and a cell phone for use of the family. This is when cell phones, this is 2001, so it's a long time ago. They kept visiting at the hospitals and offering help through multiple surgeries. The country manager kept in daily contact with Ari's family, to inquire about progress and to offer help. The country manager, the regional manager, and the area sales manager all assured him job security, saying his job would be there when he was physically and mentally ready. Also, they discussed his special needs and that the fact that the job was going to need to be adjusted for his special needs. He was in the rehab center for 3 months. The area manager arranged the carpenter who designed and manufactured a special desk, okay, that's right, that allowed him to work and use the laptop to connect to his colleagues. A country manager met with, sorry, I've lost where we are, but anyway, it doesn't matter, you're getting the food. Country manager met with Ari to determine the special needs and the medical equipment after the hospital stay. In a company meeting, they raised the fact that they weren't going to be able to cover the financial costs of the special equipment, and that prompted sharing of unused vacation days again. On a Jewish holiday, where's the Jewish holiday? There we go. The team arranged to have the sales meeting at the rehab center. They brought food, beverages, and candles for the whole rehab center. Before returning to the office, the area manager had ensured office space could accommodate the wheelchair and the special needs, and they altered basically the scope of his job so that he didn't have to travel. Now, this, if you can imagine this, I mean, I tried to do this, it doesn't work, like a vine growing. When you study this in work organizations, when people experience it as really working, it is like this living, organic thing that grows and is beautiful to behold. And what I want to tell you is this is an extensive story. I want to tell you it was happening at Cisco all the time. It was happening in the Midwest billing department all the time. This is what these are people who are doing their jobs. This is just sort of, again, the organization was enabling this deeply human, competent response to it. But I'd be amiss if I didn't sort of say it's not all like that. In fact, that's the exception. That's what we should be aiming for in our organizations. These are just two, I'm only going to read one, 2 examples of compassion failures. They happen to both be with, one's in a university, one's in healthcare, one's with a colleague, one's with a boss. But let me just do the shorter one. A professor whose father passed away recalls a colleague's impatient response to his pain. He said to me, "So how long do you think it's going to take you to get over this, the death of his father? 3 weeks, maybe? 3 weeks, maybe?" And I almost said, and I just looked at him and said, "No, I think it's going to take a lot longer than that." And so just like experiencing firsthand or witnessing compassion inspires awe and does all kinds of great things, seeing deep incivility and the barriers to compassion, again, has a lasting impact on people. And this is present all the time, too. So here are what I can look you in the eye and say, I think, based on the research, these are the things that compassion at work does. Now, at the end of the handout I gave you, all the citations are there, so you can check. But the reason I have asterisks, they're for the ones that don't have that weren't done necessarily in a workplace. So I'm extending the inference into a workplace. So they're a little bit of a caveat. So why does it matter? First, because it fortifies us. It fortifies us physiologically. Barb Fredrickson's work, some of our work in pulling together the medical evidence about how these high-quality connections affects people's bodies. Because compassion builds higher quality connections, it actually strengthens and fortifies people. It fosters a capacity to recover and resile. That's sort of No surprise. What might be more of a surprise to you is this idea of positive identity. That's another area that I've worked a lot in, and that is, who am I? Who do I see myself to be when I'm in one work organization versus another? And in organizations that we've studied with respect to compassion, what's so beautiful about it is it changes how people see themselves, even if they're just witnessing it. So it changes how they see themselves. They see themselves as actually more capable, even though they're watching things, more capable to be interpersonally competent. It changes how I see my peers, so all of a sudden I see myself as part of a whole that has a different quality, and it changes my view of the organization. It also grows us. So again, there's evidence that suggests, I think, that it makes us healthier, it makes us happier, it connects us. And this I sort of hinted, it connects us to each other. Some of my work with Adam Grant, well, I'll get to that in a little bit, suggests it connects people to the organization, so it makes them more loyal, more committed, both emotionally and cognitively. And I love, if you're into this compassion stuff, Robert Wathnow has a beautiful book. He's a sociologist called Acts of Compassion. I'm going to quote him at the end, but he talks a lot about how compassion, connects us to our sense of humanity. Witnessing compassion elevates us, inspires more compassion, generosity, more giving, more caring. And I know, that in this world you can do the positive psychology, thinks in terms of positive spirals. So this is just very much a positive spiral. And then at the organizational level, again, I said I'm a strategy person. I mean, I really care about organizations being effective. If they're not effective, they're not going to survive, or they're not going to be able to pay people well and do the good things they need to do. So compassion has to also matter at the organizational level. And again, our work suggests it attaches people, it changes the quality of connection, which allows organizations, this gets down to the bottom, to do things that are based on relationships, like coordinate better, collaborate better. So if an organization is trying to do stuff well that depends on that, compassion is really essential. If your organization is doing stuff that's just bringing people together in sort of defined kind of ways, and it doesn't require a lot of real-time coordination and stuff, that compassion is not going to be as consequential. Laura McClellan's work, I'm going to cite her later, talks about its link to service quality, and it creates a climate of caring and hope. So there's a lot. There's a lot. From a quote-unquote bottom line perspective, again, as a business school professor type, there's a lot of reasons why we should care about this. Probably the best, Kim Cameron, who I think is giving a talk on one of the other days, is from our center, and he's studied a lot about organizational virtuousness and financial performance, and he has some pretty compelling data about not compassion per se, although compassion is one part of his measure of organizational virtuousness, and it's linked to financial performance. Personally, I resist a little bit making the link to financial performance, because I think we ought to value it in and of itself, not just what it does. And the temptation, particularly at a business school, always, that press is just like, no, as a human community, we need to care about this. And we need to think about how we can make organizations help people be better as individuals, but also as institutions. So I'm going to do this actually not as a breakout. I'm going to require that you actually talk, but what I think we should process it. So instead, what I'd like you to do is write down, or think in your mind, you don't have to write down, what is one indicator you would use? Imagine you were trying to choose an organization to work for, or an organization, a customer, a client, somebody to partner with. What would you look to as an indicator that that organization is, you look on the inside and that people are doing compassion, they're doing it well? What would you look for? So write one thing down. Just going to force you to think about it for a second. Then I'm going to ask. I'm not going to cold call, I promise, but it would be great if you would offer some of your insights. Pardon? Yeah, there's handouts. No, they did? Oh, I have some more. Maybe you can give some to the other. Anybody who doesn't get one, I can send. I have my notes. Here's one more. Perfect. Two more. Okay. Here's a. Here comes one. Okay. So, yeah. So, we've had some time to think about what is one thing. So let's get some new volunteers. What's one thing? Yeah, go ahead.
The company or the organization that I'm looking at has a department or a team of people who are there to support you when you need it.
Okay. So if the organization has a dedicated set of resources that's actually to work with people's pain, that shows up in lots of different ways, but that can be an important symbol. Yeah, good.
I don't know how to say this, but non-judgmental so that it's more diverse in terms of accepting different kinds of people.
Okay. So sometimes you can tell by the demography and the culture of the place, and if it is not just tolerate, but actually, again, fostering diversity, that can be a potential indicator, a proxy for it. Yeah.
Be nimble and flexible. It's so easy to have those, HR rules or human resources, but I think compassion is so, that would be one thing
Yeah.
I look for is flexibility. Even in your interview, watching how people interact.
Ah. So this is a really, okay, so now I was going to ask you, well, I would have been pushing you a little bit, like, how do you know? How can you tell? Well, okay, but organizations and in their selection routines actually select people on this. They put people through experiences or, they ask questions and stuff that are likely to surface. Relational competence and flexibility, sort of openness can be an important indicator. What else? Did you have your hand up with the Oh, I'm sorry, I knew there was a.
If I were interviewing at a place, I'd look for plenty of genuine smiles.
Okay. Okay, and this group really knows how to look for genuine smiles, right? If it's the inauthentic. I mean, all of us get trained, particularly, marketing, people to put on the face for the organization. But to the degree genuinely people are exuding joy, or other kinds of positive emotions. Again, compassion is in that family, so it can be a really important indicator. Go ahead, I'm trying to get some different.
You mentioned openness. I think when people's concerns are openly expressed and discussed, I think that's a sign.
Yes. So safe environments. Again, if you put diversity and safety together, that's actually a wonderful combination. Problem is, those are rarely together. So if it's open, an organization that's open, particularly when it's not just open about the positive. I'm going to talk about high-quality connections, which is organizations that are more compassionate tend to have, on average, more high-quality connections. The beauty of high-quality connections is that it allows the passing of the negative as well as the positive. So the emotional caring capacity brings the positive to people, but it also allows people to express the negative. Well, it sounds like you guys have a theory of your practice. So let me just tell you what I can tell you from the research so far. One is that routines matter. Routines are the grooved ways of doing in an organization, and they're really important, not just because of what they do, but because of what they symbolize. So, for example, some organizations have no legitimate basis for people being notified about harm. And Cisco, one of the impressive things about John Chambers, he has a rule. All the HR departments globally have to notify him within 24 hours if any member of that organization has in a serious accident or some sort of threat of death. He is personally notified. He has a personal goal. Again, I don't know if he's still doing it, but he has a personal goal of notifying them personally within 24 hours. Sure, certainly with the story with Ari, it was sort of a beautiful example of that. But some organizations, just like what you just described, really put a priority on relationships and sort of tilling the soil, and so notification of harm is actually really important. Employee support, Adam Grant was one of my students. We studied Borders. Unfortunately, they're defunct, but we studied their foundation, Borders the bookstore, and found that they were the ones where if people were giving $1 through their formal employee support system, they had a foundation. If people took $1 out of their pay per week and put it into that support sort of fund that was then doled out on an as-needed basis, people could apply if they had certain things. It changed people's sense of who they were and also their loyalty to the company. So Employee support systems matter. Selection for relational skills, I already mentioned that. And rewards for helping. Actually, I love this. If Bonusly, I put Bonusly down here. This is, organizations do lots of interesting things about this, about how they reward, particularly colleague to colleague helping. And so Oracle, which is an organization we're just starting to work with, has adopted Bonusly, which allows a manager to put a certain amount per month into every employee's sort of till, and that person can dole out, usually in $10 to $20 amounts, sort of peer-to-peer rewards for different kinds of helping. Again, it's a way that tills the soil. It makes it more routine, grooves helping as a sort of a normal and valued thing. It isn't just routines, though. Okay, it's shared values. Again, this is sort of no surprise. I think someone mentioned this before. If you are in an organization where it values the whole people and means it, so it doesn't just say this when you go to their website or when you're coming across light, but they really mean, I care about the whole person, not just the person that you bring to the office, but the whole person. Those tend to be, because people express pain in so many different ways, and people have to sort of figure it out on the sense of if those lines are more, if those lines are permeable and it's valued, it could be really conducive. And care and respect, again, that should be no surprise. I've already mentioned that it's not just the routines, it's not just the shared values, it's the quality of the connections between people. And in organizations, networks matter. They don't just matter for jobs and for information, but they become really important for people sharing news about what each other need. And so in the organizations that we have studied in terms of being really good at this compassion stuff, they have networks. They're not just siloed. The networks are not just siloed, that they cross. They cross different boundaries, and they have higher quality connections. It's not just routines, it's not just shared values, it's not just the quality of the connections, it's also the roles. And someone already mentioned this. It's not, sometimes the existence of formal roles can hurt compassion because people will play, oh, well, that's not my responsibility. Somebody else, let's let the professionals deal with this. But again, it depends in part on how the roles are enacted and how they're put in, how they're understood. Again, but having this, we went into New York City right after 9/11 and studied a bunch of organizations. Reuters is one we studied pretty extensively. And, as you can imagine, that physical place, geography was inundated with a need for help. And the organizations that brought in the grief counselors first, again, symbolized it. It gave, in some sense, it licensed people to give the organization credit for the impossibility of attending to everybody. It's like that grief counselor wasn't just doing the grief counselors. They were sort of sending a signal that this organization cares enough that they would go ahead and do this. So there's the designated roles, but there's also the informal roles. And I just want to mention that toxin handlers, again, for any of you people who are studying compassion, Peter Frost has written a lot about this. This is really a powerful idea. This is the idea that some people step up in organizations and they absorb the pain. And when I have and therefore, in some sense, they mop up the pain. That's often his term. That's in an organization, particularly if the organization has a toxic leader. Oftentimes, the only way the organization will go on is when there's toxin handlers who are also cleaning up the mess. And what he's written about is in the organizations that do compassion well, most organizations have to have toxin handlers. Again, these are people who do this, but that role needs to be appreciated. People need to be restored. People need to be the fact that they are getting, absorbing stuff that's making them sick. Oh, sorry. Is something really important. And then I just want to mention in our research, I think it's really important to think about there's a role when something happens to a person, especially if it's something that's pretty serious. Oftentimes, a whole set of roles. People will self-appoint and come up and create what we call a role ecology. So some people will turn up to be coordinators. Some people will turn out to be buffers because people are sometimes inundated by too much help. And so sometimes a really important role is being able to buffer the person that's got all the pain, from all of those very genuine good intentions, but which overwhelm the person. So, and expediters, those are the people who expedite, who do use speed, because they know certain things have to get done. So I think it's important, again, if we're thinking about organizations, part of the competence in it has to be with how these roles evolve over time. And then finally, leadership matters. This is just a couple. So this is Phil Lynch, the CEO at the time of Reuters, and when right after 9/11 happened, and he was an amazing guy. He modeled one of the. They lost several employees in the towers, and one of the employees, they lost mother, would come to Reuters, to their corporate headquarters. She just didn't. It was her only son. She didn't want to believe he died, and so the CEO would spend hours with her, just sitting with her until she was ready to sort of accept the fact that she had lost her son. And again, in organizations where you study this stuff, what you realize is that, again, it doesn't have to be the CEO, but some leader who at an impactful time models what it's like, what it should be, can be hugely consequential. I just want to mention this. They profess the power of compassion. That's Karen Armstrong. Jeff Weiner is getting a lot of attention. He's at Wisdom 2.0. He's the CEO of LinkedIn. He's a CEO who sort of has professed his major value is compassion. Again, in a business school, you run into a lot of people talking high and mighty, but you don't always know, do they really do it? So here's my piece of evidence that Jeff Weiner is really doing it, because one of my students, MBA students, was hired as an intern for LinkedIn this summer, and the interview question, if you know interview questions for MBAs, they're usually pretty, you have to run the financial numbers. Their interview question was, you had to manage a senior man, no, you're a manager of some region, and you have a manager, you learned that one of your important managers, she was pregnant, she just had a preemie baby, and the baby has to be in special care, and your manager's far away. What can we do? That's the interview question about whether they're going to hire her into LinkedIn this summer. This is unbelievable. This is just so not typical. But it's an example of, in these organizations that are really good at this compassion stuff, they try not to let people in the doorway. That they try to bring people in the doorway who have that orientation, that sort of orientation towards that. So I do believe, I've never met Jeff Weiner, but I do believe that it's not just him. I don't know if it's just him, but it's trickling down. It's not just at the top. And I just have to mention Greg Fisher, who is the mayor of Louisville. Louisville, I got it correct, Louisville, supposed to be is amazing as a leader of he is really trying to he's one of the first compassion cities, trying to increase the capacity for compassion at the city level. If you're interested in this at a broader level, go to his website, see what he's doing. It's very transparent. They're really experimenting with a lot of really cool things. And then Ann Ladke, just a shout out to her. She's the founder of a really interesting organization, Women Employed, in Chicago, which is a not-for-profit that is about creating fair pay and that kind of thing for women working in low-income jobs. And I'm using her as an example of many organizations are founded on the basis of compassion, of turning someone. If that is true and it's genuine, then that gets sort of in the genetic material. So compassion, challengers, and balkers. All right, this is the third kind of opening to you, or invitation to you. And I want you to think about, imagine this had happened, that you're at work, and Pat Ewing, who's your new boss, is absent for a week, okay, with no clear explanation for why he's not been at work. When he returns, he has bruises on his hands, and he seems to be walking with a limp. You run into him in the hallway after not seeing him or hearing anything about what has kept him away. What do you do or say? Okay, now this is when we say a buzz session, which is just like 2 minutes. Turn to your partner. What would you say?
some clarification, like 10 slides back, but I don't know if you have time.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that I'm going to go. Okay. What I'm hoping is that your buzz and sort of thinking about this got you thinking about some of what we discovered about what makes compassion hard in work organization. I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly because I want to leave, I'm really mindful that I want to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to go through them in lightning speed. And perhaps if you have questions about this, this would be something, but I just realized I told you this one hasn't been trial run. It's going longer than I thought. So I want to make sure I have some time for questions. So here's some of the things that block compassion organization. It's hard to notice suffering. In many organizations, there's norms that don't let people express emotion. It tends to be gendered, too. When people are expressing emotion that shows pain, it can be gendered, which further shuts things down. Suffering and pain can often be thought of as a weakness in an organization. Again, another thing that shuts it down. And sometimes it's really hard to tell. Like bruises. What do bruises mean? What's his, there's a million things that bruising could possibly mean. And that inquiry, which we'd sort of suggested as important, actually could imply certain things that, again, may cause more harm than good. So it's tough. Noticing is tough. The challenges of interpreting suffering. Research sort of suggests it too. If you don't have capacity, and most people are being asked to do more with less in organizations, cognitive load really reduces your capacity to respond. If you appraise and you think someone, well, they can handle that. I know they have help at home. I don't need to do that. Yep, the research says that will shut it down. And there's organizational or occupational scripts that shape interpretations. So one example of that is as faculty member, we are trained that students try to take advantage of you. This is really a bad script because many students, the only adults they can seek help from are faculty. And if they walk in the door with me with that as my script, I can tell you where I'm going to lean, and it's not a good lean. So that's an important thing to think about. Feeling of suffering is also difficult because of distance. So much work is being done virtually. How do I know? I can't read. So many times the cues are things that I need face to face. Power and status differences. Actually, the research on this is actually mixed about whether power hurts or helps compassion, and then emotional exhaustion. And there's the challenge of knowing how and when to respond. I've already mentioned the problem with personal and professional boundaries. In work organizations, we apply the ethic of fairness. So, if we do for one, maybe we'll have to do for the other. Sometimes this shuts down things. Actually, again, if you're interested in compassion, ethic of care. Go to Google Scholar, look up, find ethic of care before I did. Virginia Held is the sociologist doing the best work in that. There is an alternative ethic that we don't even talk about in psychology or economics or some of these kinds of things. The ethic of care is an alternative to the ethic of fairness. And the work is beautiful. And then power and dependency. So what can we do to cultivate capacity? And again, I know this is overly simple, but it's just in some sense a reminder, remembering that there's always pain in the room, to look for pain. To remind ourselves that it's there, to look for it, to sense it, to be open-hearted. hearted, to let our bodies know, inquire and mean it, to feel suffering. I mean, again, the way psychology is sort of importantly told us about the importance of empathy and empathetic concern in particular, but listening, feeling in general, and suspending judgment. That judgment is so much what blocks compassion. So I think consciously we have to suspend it. In responding, it's remembering that being with someone, we don't have to solve it. How much do we have to remind that in our lives? We don't have to solve it, we just have to be. Be oftentimes with someone. Let your body guide you, show care, seek others' help, and choose contexts where caring is normal and valued. Think about when you hire any professional, whether it's a health-related professional, a lawyer, any set of professionals that you have assisting you in your life. I don't know how many you're thinking about whether or not they have this capacity or their institution has this capacity. But if you're in there for the long run, it's going to make a difference if they do. So choose context, not just work context, but any context that you're in. Or design context. We were talking about several of you are entrepreneurs or coaches. You are creating context. Create a context where caring is normal and valued and not soft. This is hard. And with the organizations, choose and develop compassionate leaders. We're trying actually to consciously do this. It's a real challenge. We have this wonderful, you can see videos on it, what we're doing at the business school. We send people into Detroit for the whole first week that they're in, coming from all over the globe, and they are creating new businesses for, interacting with people that they then stay connected to for 2 years. It's amazing. I have nothing to do with it. I can take no credit for this, but it's amazing. It's really changing the empathy of our students, which, again, in an MBA program is really important. Create and support compassion enabling, create high-quality connections, and shared values. I have Plant Moran here. It's an accounting firm, just as another example. In Michigan, it's corporate headquarters. I mean, they have a zero tolerance, a non-jerk workplace. And they do a lot to bring people on board. Now, I just want to finish with a quote, that compassion enriches us and ennobles us, even those of us who are neither the caregivers nor the recipients, because it holds forth a vision of what good society can be. It provides us with concrete examples of caring that we can emulate and locates us as members of a diffuse networks of which society is woven. And that's the guy, Robert Wathnow, who I love so much. So here's Compassion Lab, our center, and then we worked with the Greater Good Center at Berkeley and did this, created this quiz about if you're working in a compassionate organization, it gives you feedback. If you are interested, you can do that too. Oh, and finally, these are the Compassion Labbers. So. So I have some questions. Okay, yeah.
You inferred in your earlier slides a little bit about money, and I wanted to speak to the idea of compassion and money. From one of your slides suggested that a reward opportunity of $10, $20 here and there with the obvious hedonic treadmill sort of thing there. And then the other side of it would be the CEO who does a compassionate thing, but then there's a giant profitable outcome and the intent is lost in that mix. How do you view in any way the mix of compassion and money?
I try to live the duality. I mean, and I try to talk about the reality is that, I know that the provision of external rewards can sometimes undermine the basis for compassion. But I think, again, this is where the context really matters because it shapes what's the meaning of the money. Is the money just a tit for tat? I get, I do this, I'm nice to you, I get money. Or is it understood as here, we value the fact that we're helping each other. And we know that if we help each other in good times and bad, in the long run, we're going to wear it off. So I think in work organizations, money's always going to be important, whether you're non-for-profit or for-profit. And it's more how do we think about, this is why the metaphor for me of soil is so important. is, how do we till the soil of the context? It's not just the individual. What do we till the soil so that the kinds of meaning, when there's ambiguity, people will tip on the side of saying, when people were acting towards me, there really was a genuine, authentic, they're genuinely and authentically caring for me. So, I mean, again, I can get on my, so does that, yeah, there was, yeah. Whoops.
Can I just say, you are even better in person than in your written work, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
What are some of your, could you share with us some of the secret weapons that you either still use or that you used before that have all this credibility behind you to build interest in compassionate work, mindfulness, relationship quality to skeptical audiences?
People are so hungry for this. We are overwhelmed. I mean, I get goosebumps. I mean, again, like, it's a false thought. I mean, there are pockets of major resistors. There is so much deep human hunger for this that I'm stunned. I mean, that it's endless. It's abundant. I mean, endless. Everybody in this room can make such a difference if you have to go to where there's the beginning of reception, but again, so just believe in, I mean, our center, we're going to talk about this in two couple weeks. We've gone 10 years on no money, absolutely none, just because we can see it in our students' eyes, the difference it makes. And they're so hungry. And we have the test, like you come to a class on Wednesday, I'll see you next Wednesday, go do something. Do something. And again, like I said, this is not just go do something in my life. This is, go make a change happen in your organization. Go make a change happen in it can be your family. That can also be an organization. And you'll see it. So I guess I wouldn't worry. I mean, people keep saying to me, like, you're so, whatever, something positive. But honestly, it's a genuine privilege to be able, and people are so hungry. I just have to keep the courage to keep going because I get scared, and I think, my scared about this is not about the resistance. My scared is more like, this is so important. We are part of something that's really an important corrective. It's not just happening in positive psychology, it's happening in other social sciences, and it's happening in the social mobilizing that's happening globally. We cannot blow it. The world cannot, and we can't let our own lack of courage hold us back. And so we need each other to keep each other going. So that's my 2 cents. But I just, that's what people will say, like, oh, I'm watching the time. Maybe there's 2 more questions? Yeah.
So my name is Marisa Salazar, and I'm an NYU Stern grad.
Oh.
After you left. But anyhow, my question, I study team dynamics and team performance. I know most of your work so far has been the focus has been on an individual impact or dyadic impact. If you were to say, I'm going to put some probes out there as challenges to this audience about where you would connect the compassion concepts or constructs to team-based work.
Yeah.
Where would you say this is where the soil will be most fruitful?
Well, I think that, so you probably read the Sally Maitlis and Tom Lawrence. There's a special issue of the Academy Management Review that came out in October that's dedicated to compassion. And they've done data, they've done some studies behind it, so I would contact them. And then I would say, again, based on the fact that I think at the heart of what organization studies can bring to the table is both about the diffusion of emotion, so diffusion of emotion and how interdependence and coordination can be a vehicle for sharing not just emotion but practice, sharing ways of doing. And so I could imagine if you're an experimenter, for example, doing where you're manipulating the level of interdependence between team members or something like that, and then you're looking at basically the competence in the compassion organizing that happens in the team and how that affects not just what they're trying to do, like their innovativeness or, I don't know, let's say the quality of what they're doing, but also like whether you can measure, Barb's done this, like instantaneous effects on people's health. So like are literally people participating in those kinds of teams that do better compassion organizing, not only able to do better stuff, but do people leave them stronger, healthier, those kinds of things. So I think measuring healthcare costs, I mean, I think there's like really pragmatic things that can be done. Yeah, compassion contagion, yeah. Did you have a question that's the last?
It was the same with her, like,
Okay, there was somebody who came up to me. Was it? Yeah, okay. So it was the same, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
when you talk about hiring people and you have the LinkedIn example, have you found that there's any correlation between kindness in the via and compassion?
I don't know. No, I mean, I don't measure strengths. This is is there a relationship between kindness and the values inventory?
And someone being compassionate, is there gender differences in compassion?
Well, okay. Oh, there's this big debate. If you're on the Stanford thing, there's this back and forth about whether the Dalai Lama just said this week that a woman should be the next Dalai Lama. That was like, whoa. And so it's sort of promoted all this work, this sort of trying to pull research together on women versus men. It's unclear. It's unclear. My experience in doing, if we think about women as sex versus women as gender, in work organizations, compassion work tends to get is gendered work. And like in my studies, the ones that are stepping up and doing this really competent role making are women for the most part. And they tend to be women who are at lower ranks in organizations who are using their relational competence sort of beautifully. So I think it's really important to not necessarily think about male-female, but sort of what kinds of relational work around compassion gets valued, and how can we make sure it's valued in ways that allow it to be effective, and that sort of thing. It's really, get Emma Sapella, who is the woman who is at Stanford, this postdoc who posts all this stuff on Stanford's, she just wrote for APA, she does blogging, and she just wrote 2 of them on compassion in women and male-female differences, so she might find her helpful. I think I'm at the end.
Before everyone leaves, I know everyone got so much out of this, and a lot of you can't remember the responses. You could just take a moment, I call it intermission, to write down your thoughts about compassionate work, what you're interested in, what's intriguing you, and your name and your email.
And Lisa is the CEO of Soaring Words. The founder and CEO of Soaring Words is this wonderful organization that we've been blogging together between the Compassion Lab and Soaring Words. She's trying very much in her organization to bring compassion capability more into hospitals and children. Is that right? Yeah, so she's not just helping me here, she's a major partner. So thank you everyone for coming.